Welcome to Insights That Matters. We're diving deep into the stories behind the numbers. I'm your host.
And I'm glad to be joining you today.
Today we're taking a look at Megatherm Induction Limited.
They're really making waves in the Indian industrial landscape.
For our listeners, we've been looking at some really interesting material about Megatherm.
Yeah, what stood out to you the most?
Well, first, they're all about this induction equipment. Think about it melting and heating metals. It's a crucial process for industries.
Like steel.
Exactly, steel, automotive.
And what's interesting is Megatherm's emphasis on energy efficiency. Especially in India, electricity costs are a major concern for so many businesses. Providing reliable and energy-saving solutions, that's a smart move.
Absolutely, addressing a pain point. Great way to gain a competitive edge. Speaking of which, did you see their move into transformer manufacturing?
Oh yeah, huge development. Setting up a new facility, going to be massive.
Largest in Eastern India.
Yeah, and it makes sense, Ties into the growing demand for transformers, especially with the push towards renewable energy.
Like solar.
Exactly, solar. So they're really anticipating the future needs of the power sector in India, positioning themselves well.
Okay, let's talk numbers. Financials. What caught my eye is how their revenues stayed pretty stable, but profitability has improved.
Interesting.
And they say it's because of this, quote, strategic backward integration.
Now, for our listeners who may not know that term,
Yeah, break it down.
backward integration basically means bringing more of their production process in-house. Instead of relying on other suppliers for parts, they're taking control.
So they're cutting out the middleman.
Right. That gives them way better control over costs, quality, and their profit margins.
Very impressive.
Shows a real understanding of optimizing their business.
Okay, get ready because Megatherm isn't stopping there. They've outlined some serious growth plans, reaching 500 crore rupees in revenue.
500 crore.
That's right.
500 crore rupees. Wow. For our international listeners, that's roughly 60 million US dollars.
They're aiming high. And they're not just focused on that top-line growth. They want to increase their market share across different sectors and go global.
It sounds like they want to be a major force, not just in India, but on the world stage.
It's clear they have big ambitions and a hunger for expansion. But what really struck me was their talk about potential acquisitions down the line.
Yes, that was interesting. They specifically mentioned keeping an eye on Electrotherm.
Interesting. Electrotherm, a competitor, right, in the induction furnace space.
That's right. And they've been facing some difficulties lately.
Haven't they?
Yeah, some financial headwinds, which seems to have caught Megatherm's attention. Maybe they see an opportunity there to acquire some assets or even try a takeover.
Wow, a power play.
It would definitely shake things up in the industry.
For sure. It would signal a real shift in the competitive landscape, potentially consolidating market power within Megatherm.
Potentially, yes.
Yes. We also have to consider the broader context, though. The market is influenced by global trends, fluctuations in steel prices, domestic policies focused on renewable energy.
Right, the steel market has been a bit volatile.
It has. But Megatherm hasn't reported any order cancellations or delays. In fact, they've emphasized their diversification, branching out into sectors like automotive and railways.
Smart move, not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly. And they've been highlighting their strong focus on after-sales service and spare parts. Seems to be generating a steady stream of recurring revenue.
Which is crucial for stability, especially for a company with big growth plans. Provides a cushion to weather any market fluctuations and invest in future expansion.
Shows real long-term thinking.
Absolutely. It shows a commitment to building a sustainable business, reassuring for potential investors.
Definitely suggests that Megatherm is carefully plotting its course.
Not just reacting to the market.
Now, they've been pretty vocal about wanting to become a global player. But they're not alone, right? How do you see this landscape evolving?
Well, the induction equipment market is heating up, that's for sure, both domestically and internationally.
So how can Megatherm stand out? What's their secret sauce?
From what I see, they're emphasizing a few key things. First, their focus on energy efficiency is resonating, especially in India, where electricity costs are a big deal.
Makes sense. Addressing a real bottom-line issue for their customers.
Exactly. And second, they're pushing hard on after-sales service and spare parts, building customer loyalty, providing that steady, recurring revenue.
It's not just about selling equipment, it's about building a long-term partnership.
Precisely. And finally, they're investing heavily in research and development, innovating and expanding their products.
So they're not content with being just another player. They're trying to push the boundaries.
Absolutely. That commitment to innovation will be crucial as they go into new markets and face those global competitors.
It sounds like they're building a very strong foundation. But let's be realistic. There are going to be challenges. What potential roadblocks do you see?
Well, the global economic environment is always a factor.
True.
Any slowdown in industrial activity, especially in sectors like steel and automotive, could impact the demand for their equipment.
Right. They're not immune to those big macroeconomic forces. Anything else?
Competition is always a concern. As they expand globally, they'll face more rivals with established networks and brand recognition.
A battle for market share.
For sure. And they'll need to navigate cultural differences, regulatory hurdles, maybe even trade barriers in these new markets.
It's a complex landscape, but it seems like they're approaching it with like a blend of ambition and caution.
Taking calculated risks.
Yeah.
Probably the best approach in this kind of dynamic environment. You mentioned their potential acquisition of Electrotherm earlier. How do you think that might fit into their strategy?
Well, if they can do it, it could really change the game. Suddenly, they'd have a much larger presence in the Indian market.
And it eliminates a competitor, gives them access to Electrotherm's customer base, distribution channels.
Not to mention all those potential synergies in terms of technology, manufacturing capabilities, and even talent.
Right. It could really speed up their growth and solidify their position as a leader.
It's bold, but it comes with risks too, right? Integrating two companies, especially those with different cultures and operating models.
Oh, absolutely. Potential clashes in management styles, resistance from employees, aligning systems and processes.
And the financial risks too. Acquisitions can be expensive. And if they overpay or have integration challenges, it could hurt them.
All valid concerns. It'll be interesting to see how they approach this potential acquisition if they decide to move forward and whether they can manage those risks effectively.
Definitely something to watch. So for our listeners, what are the key takeaways here?
I think it's clear that Megatherm is a company on the move. They have a clear vision, a solid plan, and the drive to succeed.
They're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk, investing, innovating, and positioning themselves strategically.
And they're not afraid to take risks like we talked about with those potential acquisitions.
But they face challenges too, right? Intense competition, unpredictable global factors, and the hurdles that come with acquisitions.
Right. We have to acknowledge both the potential and the risks.
So what's the big question our listeners should be thinking about? What about Megatherm's future?
Well, here's a thought. Given Megatherm's ambitions, their strategy, and this dynamic market, can they actually reach their goal and become a global leader in induction equipment?
That's a great question.
It is a big one.
They have the potential, the drive, and the strategic thinking. But those challenges are real.
Their success will depend on their execution, how they adapt, and how they navigate the complexity of global expansion.
It's a journey with opportunities and obstacles, and we'll be watching closely.
We encourage all our listeners to do the same. Look deeper into their financials, their presentations, and their competition. The more you know, the better you'll be able to evaluate their potential for yourself.
Great advice. And that wraps up this part of our deep dive into Megatherm Induction Limited.
Stay tuned for more.
We'll be back soon to explore even more about this fascinating company. And until then, keep those insights flowing.
See you soon.
It certainly suggests that Megatherm is a company that's carefully plotting its course, not just reacting to market whims. Now, they've been pretty vocal about their ambition to become a global player, but they're not alone in that aspiration. How do you see this competitive landscape evolving?
Well, the induction equipment market is definitely heating up, both domestically and internationally. You have established players from Europe, China, and of course within India itself.
Right. So how can Megatherm stand out in such a crowded field? What's their secret sauce?
From what we've gathered, they're emphasizing a few key differentiators. First, their focus on energy efficiency is resonating strongly in the Indian market, where electricity costs are a major concern.
Makes sense. They're offering a solution that directly addresses a bottom-line issue for their customers.
Exactly. And second, they're pushing hard on after-sale service and spare parts availability. This builds customer loyalty and provides a steady stream of recurring revenue.
Smart move. It's not just about selling the equipment. It's about being a reliable partner throughout the product lifecycle.
Precisely. And finally, they're investing heavily in research and development, constantly innovating and expanding their product portfolio.
So they're not content with just being a Me Too player. They're actively trying to push the boundaries of what's possible in induction technology.
Absolutely. And that commitment to innovation is likely to be crucial as they venture into new markets and face off against global competitors.
It sounds like they're building a strong foundation for sustainable growth. But let's be realistic, there are bound to be challenges along the way. What potential roadblocks do you see?
Well, the global economic environment is always a factor. Any slowdown in industrial activity, particularly in sectors like steel and automotive, could impact demand for their equipment.
Right, they're not immune to macroeconomic forces. Anything else that could trip them up.
Competition is always a concern. As they expand globally, they'll face more aggressive rivals with established distribution networks and brand recognition.
It's going to be a battle for market share, that's for sure.
Indeed. And they'll need to navigate cultural differences, regulatory hurdles, and potentially even trade barriers in these new markets.
It's a complex landscape to navigate, but it seems they're approaching it with a blend of ambition and caution.
They're taking calculated risks, which is probably the best approach in such a dynamic environment. Now, you mentioned their potential acquisition of Electrotherm earlier. How might that play into their overall strategy?
Well, if they could pull it off, it could be a game changer. Suddenly they'd have a much larger footprint in the Indian market, potentially even achieving a dominant position.
It would also eliminate a key competitor and give them access to Electrotherm's existing customer base and distribution channels.
Not to mention the potential synergies in terms of technology manufacturing capabilities and talent.
Right. It could really accelerate their growth trajectory and solidify their position as a leading player.
It's a bold move, but it comes with risks too. Integrating two companies, especially those with different cultures and operating models, can be a complex and challenging process.
Absolutely. There's always the potential for clashes in management styles, resistance from employees, and difficulties in aligning systems and processes.
And let's not forget the financial risks. Acquisitions can be expensive, and if they overpay or encounter unexpected integration challenges, it could strain their balance sheet.
Those are all valid concerns. It'll be interesting to see how they approach this potential acquisition and whether they can effectively mitigate the risks involved.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. So for our listener who's been following along with this deep dive, what are the key takeaways?
Well, I think it's clear that Megatherm Induction Limited is a company on the move. They have a clear vision, a solid strategy, and the determination to succeed.
They're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk.
Yep.
Investing in growth, innovating, and strategically positioning themselves to capture emerging market opportunities.
They're also not afraid to take calculated risks, as evidenced by their interest in acquisitions.
But as we've discussed, they face challenges as well. The competitive landscape is intense, macroeconomic factors can be unpredictable, and acquisitions come with their own set of hurdles.
Right. It's important to acknowledge both the potential and the pitfalls.
It's a fascinating case study, really.
Yeah.
You have this ambitious Indian company rooted in a traditional industry, but with their sights set on global domination.
It really speaks to the dynamism of the Indian economy, this blend of the established and the cutting edge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Megatherm really embodies that, pushing boundaries while staying grounded in what they know. Let's bring it all together for our listeners. We've covered a lot. Their focus on energy efficiency, the expansion into transformers, their strategic backward integration, ambitious growth plans, and even a potential acquisition.
Yeah, it's a lot to digest, but it points to a company with a clear path towards growth.
They play in the long game, making smart investments.
And all of this in a market that's constantly changing, facing competition both at home and abroad.
So the big question for our listeners,
Here's the thought I'll leave you with. Given everything we've talked about, their ambition, their strategy, this dynamic market, can Megatherm actually reach their goal? Can they become a global leader in induction equipment?
that's the question, isn't it? They have the potential, the drive, the strategy,
Yeah.
but those challenges are there.
Their success will come down to execution, adaptation, and how they handle the complexities of global expansion.
It's a journey, that's for sure. One we'll be watching closely.
And we encourage our listeners to do the same. Really dig into their information, their financials, their presentations. The more informed you are, the better you can evaluate their potential.
That's great advice. And that wraps up this episode of Insights That Matters. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Megatherm Induction Limited. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more insightful conversations about the businesses and trends shaping our world. Until next time.